Let's unpack a massive, honestly, kind of surprising geopolitical curveball that just dropped in South Asia. If you follow this region at all, you know the India-Pakistan dynamic is pretty much defined by border tensions, high emotions, and really complex global pressures. But recently, a statement came out that legitimately caused political analysts everywhere to do a massive double-take.
India should hold talks with Pakistan. Cultural and social ties between the people must continue. Now, if some moderate diplomat said this, it wouldn't even make the back page. But this was said by Dattatreya Hosabale, the General Secretary of the RSS, and then backed up by former Army Chief General M.M. Naravane. Coming from the absolute top tier of a historically hardline nationalist organization, this is a huge, unexpected contradiction.
So, looking at this glaring paradox, we really have to ask the big question. Are we seeing a genuine fundamental shift in nationalist strategy here, or is this just the result of some heavy, behind-the-scenes international pressure? Let's dive into the source material and figure out what's actually going on. To really get why this peace proposal is so wild, we have to look at the context. Basically, the public is dealing with some serious diplomatic whiplash right now. For literally decades, the RSS has maintained a remarkably strict, uncompromising ideological stance on Pakistan. Anytime there's an event that triggers intense nationalistic feelings, talk of peace is usually treated with extreme suspicion. But now, seemingly out of nowhere, we have these sudden, high-profile calls for dialogue and cultural exchange. For seasoned observers and the general public alike, this pivot is totally jarring. It just doesn't fit the established playbook. Well, to find the missing puzzle pieces, our sources point us westward, specifically toward American diplomatic influence. Over the last few months, key RSS figures, including Hosabale and Ram Madhav, actually took some pretty significant trips to the U.S. And these definitely weren't just breezy goodwill tours. They faced some real heat. Diaspora groups, major think tanks, and human rights organizations were asking tough questions about India's domestic policies. Reports show there is this growing anxiety in Western circles regarding perceived anti-Muslim ideologies and a real fear that hardline politics might be fracturing India's democratic diversity. And you can literally see the weight of that American pressure playing out in real time. During his trip, Ram Madhav gave an interview where he basically said India follows U.S. suggestions on stuff like tariffs and oil. He quickly retracted it, putting out an apology and clarification on X, but honestly, that little slip-up was super telling. It undeniably shows that U.S. pressure on Indian foreign policy is a very real, very active force that you just can't brush aside. So, why is the U.S. leaning in so hard right this second? Well, because the globe is basically a powder keg. With the tensions between Iran and Israel constantly threatening to upend global oil markets, the very last thing Western powers need is another flashpoint in South Asia. So they are heavily incentivized to gently, or maybe not so gently, pressure India into dialing down the rhetoric. They absolutely need the region to stay quiet to protect global energy security. But stepping away from Washington for a second, let's look at the hard reality right next door in Pakistan. There is a deeply frustrating historical cycle here that makes any peace pitch really hard for the Indian public to swallow. We've seen outreach before, right? The Simla Agreement, the historic Lahore bus journey, the Agra summit, even Prime Minister Modi's surprise drop-in at Nawaz Sharif's family event. But what almost always follows? Catastrophic terror attacks. Pathankot, Uri, Pulwama. History shows us, time and time again, that diplomatic outreach is frequently met with violence. And the reason for that endless cycle is structural. The broad international consensus is that Pakistan's democracy is essentially a facade. Presidents and prime ministers rotate in and out, but the true, unyielding power sits squarely with the military. And here is the core issue. That military establishment practically relies on anti-India hostility for its own survival. Border tensions and religious propaganda aren't just byproducts. They're the very tools the military uses to keep its iron grip on power. Which brings up a logistical nightmare that analysts are quick to point out. Without a rock-solid strategic outline, who exactly is India supposed to negotiate with? Do you sit down with democratic leaders who don't actually have the power to enforce peace? Or do you talk to the military brass whose entire existence depends on remaining your sworn enemy? As it stands, this new peace proposal lacks a tactical roadmap for that reality. And that brings us to the domestic calculations happening inside India itself. We're seeing a massive ideological split screen right now. On one hand, top leadership, guys like Hosabale and occasionally even RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat, are making these moderate, conciliatory statements. They're projecting a real rhetoric of reconciliation. But if you look at the daily news, the ground reality is often intense polarization, calvigilantism, and ongoing religious disputes. The words coming from the very top just aren't matching the actions happening at the grassroots level. Because of that huge disconnect, impartial observers have to question the timing. Is this sudden pivot just a calculated attempt to project a soft image ahead of some incredibly crucial, highly contested state elections like the ones coming up in Uttar Pradesh? Think about it. When a political movement is catching heat domestically and internationally for being too aggressive, softening the tone publicly is a classic electoral strategy. It helps appeal to swing voters and definitely eases the international scrutiny. Which brings us to the core contradiction at the heart of this entire explainer. The sources argue a really crucial point. Sustainable international diplomacy is pretty much impossible to maintain if it completely contradicts your own domestic politics. You literally cannot fuel a domestic politics of suspicion while simultaneously trying to shake hands across the border. It confuses the public and ruins your credibility. The argument here is that true peace requires treating minorities as equal democratic partners and building genuine internal social harmony before you can even think about building international trust. And let's not forget who actually foots the bill for all this geopolitical maneuvering. At the end of the day, it's the regular citizens of these two nuclear-armed neighbors who carry the heavy economic and emotional weight of endless conflict. Endless posturing might give a temporary bump to politicians, but the people, they overwhelmingly just want stability, good jobs, and peace. So I want to leave you with a final thought from our analysis today. As we watch this surprising diplomatic rhetoric play out, we really have to ask, can any nation successfully export peace if it hasn't first established true harmony at home? It takes an incredible amount of political courage to abandon divisive politics for genuine peace. So whether this recent shift is a real change of heart, a reaction to global pressure, or just a slick election tactic, well, the coming months are absolutely going to reveal the truth. Thanks for tuning into this explainer, and keep questioning what's really driving the headlines.